Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy us a podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Well, again, John, there has been no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians, or Trump and Russians. No collusion. When I watch you interviewing all the people leaving their committees, I mean, the Democrats are all running for office and they're trying to say this, that, but bottom line,
And the
they all say
Republicans
there's no
are.
collusion. And there is no collusion. And when you talk about interviews, Hillary Clinton had an interview where she wasn't sworn in. She wasn't given the oath. They didn't take notes. They didn't record. And it was done on the 4th of July weekend. That's perhaps ridiculous, and a lot of people looked upon that as being a very serious breach, and it really was. But again, I'll speak to attorneys. I can only say this. There was absolutely no collusion. Everybody knows it. Every committee. I've been in office now for 11 months. For 11 months, they've had this phony cloud over this administration, over our government, and it has hurt our government. It does hurt our government. It's a Democrat hoax that was brought up as an excuse for losing an election that, frankly, the Democrats should have won because they have such a tremendous advantage in the Electoral College. So it was brought up for that reason. But it has been determined that there is no collusion, and by virtually everybody. So we'll see what happens.
But again, would you be open to?
We'll see what happens. I mean, certainly I'll see what happens. But when they have no collusion and nobody's found any collusion at any level, it seems unlikely that you'd even have an interview.
All right, then.
Well, Simpson's testimony suggests the exact opposite, that there is actually evidence of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, that his research firm found this while they were investigating more routine political opposition research that they might use for a client against President Trump. And not only that, but that what they found alleging collusion, they found was so serious they called up the FBI, and the FBI came back to them and said, you know what, we believe you because, and this is really key, according to Simpson's testimony, the FBI had a source on the inside of the Trump campaign. Here's what Glenn Simpson said to Congress. He said, essentially, what Chris Steele, the author of the dossier, told me was they had other intelligence about this matter from an internal Trump campaign source.
Oh.
My understanding was they believed Chris at this point. They believed his information might be credible because they had other intelligence that indicated the same thing. One of those pieces of intelligence was a human source from inside the Trump organization.
Oh, damn. Snap. Oh. No collusion. There's no collusion. And no, I'm not going to talk to Mueller. He said he would talk to Mueller. He said, of course he would talk to Mueller. He has no problem talking to Mueller. Now all of a sudden, Hillary Clinton, who was not president of the United States and was not, charged with, taking help from a foreign adversary in order to win a presidential campaign. She got to testify about using a private server for emails on the 4th of July weekend, and he feels they didn't take notes and, she wasn't sworn in. But you all know now, because we all know now, that it is a crime in and of itself to lie to federal investigators. If she wasn't sworn, it didn't matter. If she was sworn, it would be the same crime if she lied. So, he's just obsessed with deflecting. Now, yesterday, I told you, Dianne Feinstein did two amazing things. One, she floated, hey, what if we just do a clean DACA deal? And idiot boy president says, yeah, I'm open to that. Let's do that. Let's do just a clean DACA deal, and then we can, go the next day. Like, we'll have lunch, and then we'll come back, and we'll do comprehensive immigration reform. You know what's really interesting about this truthful Trump White House, who we're supposed to believe? When the transcripts of that meeting, and listen, we did this on the fly yesterday, this meeting that they had at the White House, and I knew that was like hair-raising news. That she asked that question is not hair-raising news. That she asked that question was very smart politics on her part. But that he answered it, yeah, let's do that. And that Kevin McCarthy said, whoa, no. You want the wall, right? You give them DACA, you have no leverage. You'll never get your wall. That was hair-raising news. All right, so we did that part yesterday to show you what was just bizarre. Was that when the White House released the transcripts of a televised congressional meeting that we all saw, that we have clips from, that we, witnessed with our own lying eyes, that you could hear for yourself. Here, just to refresh.
And I don't know how you would feel about this, but I'd like to ask the question. What about a clean DACA bill now?
What about it?
And with a commitment that we go into a comprehensive immigration reform procedure like we did back, I remember when Kennedy was here. And it was really a major effort, and it was a great disappointment that it went nowhere.
I have no problem. I think that's basically what Dick is saying. We're going to come out with DACA. We're going to do DACA, and then we can start immediately on the phase 2, which would be comprehensive.
Would you be agreeable to that?
Yeah, I would like to do that.
Yeah, I would like that.
I think a lot of people would like to see that. But I think we have to do DACA first.
Mr. President, you need to be clear, though. I think what Senator Feinstein's asking here, when we talk about just DACA, we don't want to be back here 2 years later. You have to have security, as the Secretary would tell you.
But I think that's what she's saying.
I think she's saying something different.
No. I think she's not saying that, Mr. President. She's not saying that. Okay. When the transcripts came out of that meeting, they left out his answer to Dianne Feinstein. They left it out. I mean, I can't explain to you how this man is. Well, you can't trust him, but honest to God, he literally took out the agreement that he made with Dianne Feinstein. Anyway, I say this just to remind you that he is a world heavyweight champion liar who, whenever he's embarrassed by his own proclamations, Mexico's going to pay for the whatever. It just doesn't he never said it. He doesn't know you. You're a coffee boy, never met you, wouldn't recognize you in a lineup, right? This is all very important because here's where we're at. The other thing Dianne Feinstein did yesterday that was so awesome was you remember the day before yesterday, I told you I was, that you could do this too. You could tweet out under a hashtag, release the transcripts. I explained to you that I actually read it to you. There was an op-ed in the New York Times that was written by Glenn Simpson, the co-founder of Fusion GPS, who created the dossier, right? The dossier. And that Glenn Simpson and his partner at Fusion were begging the Senate Judiciary Committee to release the transcripts of the 10 hours of testimony that Glenn Simpson had. There's actually 21 hours of testimony between Glenn Simpson and his partner from Fusion, but that they released the transcripts of Glenn Simpson's testimony. So the person who testified is saying he wants it out there. He wants it out there. He wants the American people to be able to read what he testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Fusion did as far as work on this dossier and prior to it. Like who hires him and how he has Republicans and Democrats and, what his company does and who he is and what kind of things that they undertake, what kind of investigations they do, how they execute these investigations, where they go, what they ask, who they know. And he testified for 10 long hours about all this and was asking that the testimony be released. Why? Because the freaks over at Fox News, who I believe are also compromised by Russians, I really do. I believe that there's collusion over there between the Russian government's wet dreams, hopes, and nationalist desires for the United States to sow chaos in the United States, etc. I think that they get tipped off by, it's the same as RT. It's just a propaganda network, and I believe that. So that Fox News has been saying that the entire investigation into Donald Trump is based on the dossier and nothing else. And that Glenn Simpson is a criminal, and Glenn Simpson had an axe to grind, and so did Michael Steele. They hated Trump, and that, they manufactured the PP tape. It doesn't exist. None of this ever happened, and that they weren't really hired by a Republican, which they were. And that Christopher Steele had a partisan axe to. None of that is true. And that is why Glenn Simpson wanted his testimony released to the public so that we could see what he testified to under oath in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee in private. Why these are not public hearings is beyond me. We deserve to know this. I mean, Oliver North testified in public. I remember, in his uniform, even though he was out of the military, he still wore his stinking uniform. Like, it was a case of arrested development or something. Do you know? And he gave us the "you can't handle the truth" thing. Yes, you have the audacity to question the manner in which I laundered Saudi money, which is what he was convicted of and then pardoned, right? So Dianne Feinstein decided that she would release the transcripts. And she did release them yesterday. And I couldn't explain them to you yesterday because they were 312 pages of 10 hours of testimony. And I couldn't read them during the show to tell you what's in them. But I did last night, and I finished them this morning. And let me tell you something the media isn't going to tell you. The first 150 pages, and this is for loyal clients of the Randi Rhodes Show, will remember, and people who are coming on board a little late to the game or whatever, you won't. But if you have a podcast, you have access to all of our archives, and you can go through them. And you can find the several shows that we did on a thing called the Prevezon case. And you can find a show where we actually interviewed a man named Bill Browder. What are these things? Bill Browder was a man who had a hedge fund that operated in Russia. He's an American, but he's not an American citizen any longer. He gave up his citizenship, and he started doing business in Russia, and he created a hedge fund. And all of a sudden, he's looking at his books, and he realizes that $230 million is gone. And he's got proof that Vladimir Putin, through the Russian mob, stole $230 million from him. And he hires a forensic accountant and a lawyer, one person, named Sergei Magnitsky. And Sergei Magnitsky does all the legwork and does all the research and does all the accounting and all the and Sergei Magnitsky proves that the $230 million stolen from Hermitage, from his hedge fund, was stolen by the Russian mob and given to Vladimir Putin. And so he starts, finding out, Sergei does, that the money was then laundered to make it clean through New York real estate. Oh, yeah. You know where this is going. And that the real estate that they bought with the $230 million was high-end luxury real estate in New York City. And so Bill Browder tries to get the New York City prosecutors involved in this case. But the best he could come up with was, Preet Bharara. Yeah. Preet Bharara decided he would prosecute it in civil court to try and recover the money. This would give him access to discovery and all the... Meantime, Sergei Magnitsky, who lives in Russia, is jailed and beaten and killed in a Russian prison. And this is why Bill Browder goes on a worldwide campaign to get something called the Magnitsky Act passed. And those were sanctions on Russian banks. Russian banks that were affiliated with the Russian mob who stole $230 million from him. This case was under investigation for a very long time. Here in the United States, the law firm that was hired to represent Prevezon's claim that they stole nothing, and that Bill Browder himself stole the money, and that Sergei Magnitsky, was lying, was an American law firm named Baker Hostetler. So what Baker Hostetler did was they hired a private investigator to go deep into Bill Browder's background, to find out what Bill Browder's hedge fund dealt in, what the taxes looked like, why he wasn't an American citizen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that private investigation was conducted by Fusion GPS. Glenn Simpson. They looked into Bill Browder up one wall and down another. And they couldn't even, they couldn't find very much well, they wanted Bill Browder to testify. I'll shorthand it that way. They wanted Bill Browder to testify. But Bill Browder isn't an American citizen, so they were having a hard time getting him to come to the United States to serve a subpoena. Fusion looked into Bill Browder and found out that Bill Browder owned a house in Aspen and some cars in Aspen. And that when he came to Aspen, they were able to serve him with a subpoena so that he would have to testify in the Prevezon case. That's what Fusion GPS's job was, to locate Bill Browder so that he could be served with a subpoena. And he was hired by a law firm, an American law firm called Baker Hostetler. The lawyer for Prevezon was one Natalia Veselnitskaya. Just hold that thought, because these are very important facts leading up to the payoff.
For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit RandiRhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
Whether you're listening to me, Mark Levine, each Monday and Wednesday,
or me, Leslie Marshall, each Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday,
you can hear us 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Voices Network.
Here's a sample of what you'll hear.
2017 is hopefully, if not the beginning of the end of the beginning of Donald Trump. This is a test of America. And hopefully, like that little piece of smallpox that they put in to immunize you to the great disease, hopefully this will be a wake-up call. The fight to protect our press, in the fight to protect our immigrants, Native Americans and African Americans, LGBT people and Jews and women and anyone this guy attacks, frankly, to protect the middle class, to protect poor people, to protect innocent Americans who are just trying to live their lives, that we will immunize ourselves and make us stronger. And for better and for worse, this was a year all about Donald Trump. Actually, I think I should say for worse and for even worse, it was a year about Donald Trump. From our trepidations, our fear at the beginning of the year of what would happen once he became president on January 20th, to our incredible astonishment at how awful a president he was. The tweets alone showed a man who is not only incapable of understanding public policy, he has no interest in it. He just makes up stuff as he goes along, and most of it is false. It really showed a little bit about who our country is. I think the Trump administration in 2017 reminds me of those disaster movies. You know the ones. Things start out where things are okay, but you fear something really bad is going to happen, and then really bad things do happen, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And then, just when you think it'll be okay, it gets even worse. But then as the movies end, somehow the heroes regroup and find a way out of the darkness, find a way to stop whatever fire or intense hurricane or horrible disaster, maybe it's Godzilla, is wrecking the village, and they come together and they count their dead and they hug each other and they realize after beating the monster they will live to see a better tomorrow. One of the biggest stories is activism that culminated, yes, in the Virginia and Alabama elections, but began the day after inauguration. The whole world was telling Donald Trump, we don't accept your vision of hatred and fear. And that activism is definitely what brought us to the great elections at the end of 2017. And frankly, I think it's going to propel us on to 2018. I think the lessons of 2017 were we were complacent in 2016. We didn't think this terrible thing could happen. And now we know it can, and it does, and we're ready to fight it. Again, that's Mark Levine every Monday and Wednesday.
And Leslie Marshall each Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday.
3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the Progressive Voices Network.
All things Randy at randyrhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
All right, so Preet Bharara is investigating Prevezon, okay, on behalf of Bill Browder, who says that the Russian mob stole $230 million from Browder's hedge fund. Baker Hostetler is the American law firm who hires Fusion GPS to investigate Browder, which is what happens in high stakes litigation. Okay, it really is nothing shocking. So they're investigating Browder, and they're trying to figure out where and when Browder will be in the United States so that they can serve him with a subpoena. They do that job. They find out that he's got cars and a house in Aspen, and they do serve him with a subpoena. Bill Browder then argues that the subpoena was served improperly. I could go through the details for those of you who are lawyers. If you want to talk about that, we can discuss whether or not he had any standing or any reason to say that. But I believe he did. So he doesn't acknowledge the subpoena, and he does not want to testify in this Prevezon case. Meanwhile, this is 2013, and two things are going on. Browder is served, then he fights the subpoena for another, couple of years because the Prevezon case goes on and on and on and on. Fusion is out, though. They're done. 2013, they're done with the Bill Browder, Baker Hostetler employment. They're contracted by this law firm to do this work, and they're done, okay? But the case isn't. The case goes on and on and on. Fast forward, Trump becomes the president of the United States. He's sworn in January 20th, right, 2017. And Preet Bharara is the prosecutor in this Prevezon case, and all of a sudden, 3 months into Trump's presidency, he fires Preet Bharara. Remember that? Everybody remember that? It's not just Sally Yates, and it's not just, Comey. Fires Preet Bharara. 2 months after Preet Bharara is fired, this case that's been going on forever is suddenly settled. A $230 million case of theft by the Russian mob is suddenly settled by Natalia Veselnitskaya on the Russian side, Baker Hostetler, and the New York attorney's office, the Preet Bharara's office, because Preet's gone, and he's the one that's been, prosecuting this. So now all of a sudden they're like, all right, we'll settle. And they settle it for $6 million little dollars. $6 million. Which, by the way, Russia has never paid. Just saying. So Trump becomes president. Preet Bharara is fired. And then the Prevezon case that's been going on forever is suddenly settled for a minuscule amount that's never paid. All right, why do I bring this up? Because the transcript that we're talking about, the transcript that Glenn Simpson wanted released to the public, he spends the first 150 pages of it talking about his work that he did for Baker Hostetler and that he was hunting Bill Browder, which is why Bill Browder, I printed out, I still have my questions from the day that I interviewed Bill Browder. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Question number 7 was, Fusion GPS founder Glenn Simpson was doing Oppo research on you and at the same time hired Chris Steele to investigate Trump and his Russian ties. You filed a FARA complaint with Congress, and now it seems both of you will testify together on separate panels. How does that work? Because this was public knowledge. I'm not telling you anything that isn't there for the media to be reporting. Hello, Don Lemon. Hello, Chris Cuomo. Hello. Congratulations on your new show. Could have lived without Scaramucci last night, but okay, I'll be watching. Oh, that was terrible. But all right. So Fusion is done investigating Bill Browder in 2013. Fusion is then hired by a different Republican, the guy who owns the Washington Free Beacon, Paul Singer, I believe is his name. He then hires Fusion GPS 2 years later to do a general investigation of Donald Trump because he's a never Trumper. And so he hires the same firm, which is they're done hunting Bill Browder. They've been done with hunting Bill Browder 2 years ago. They've done business in between and blah, blah, blah. They've been hired by Democratic, people. They've been hired by Republican people. Mostly they're hired by law firms to look into people that are suing or people that are, that they want background information on so they could pop them at a deposition or catch them in a lie. This is the kind of work that Fusion does. And Glenn Simpson is an American. Okay, so this whole thing which she colluded with the Russian, he's off his rocker. All right, so all these many years later, by the way, in 2013, Trump was in Moscow and he was doing the Miss Universe pageant. That's a separate thing. A couple of years later, this Paul Singer guy hires Fusion to look generally into Donald Trump's, background. Find out, it was generally known, and everybody in this audience knows, Trump's got sweatshops that manufacture his ties. He makes his suits in China or his shirts in China. I mean, David Letterman popped him on this years and years ago. So this was common knowledge, right? And so this Paul Singer dude from the Washington Free Beacon, he hires Fusion. He goes, I want you to look into, does he have sweatshops? I know he's got a building in Panama. What kind of finances is that? He's got a building in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. What the hell's going on there? And Azerbaijan, of all places? What is he doing in Azerbaijan? And where is he getting all this financing? And the guy's declared bankruptcy so many times that the banks have declared him unloanable, unlendable. He's like a pariah. Nobody will how is he getting all his money? And that is what Paul Singer hired Fusion to do. And Fusion begins to do this work, okay? They begin to do this work, and then Trump wins the Republican nomination. And Paul Singer says, well, I tried. But, meanwhile, Fusion was finding out all this stuff that Trump had, crazy business dealings in former Soviet republics, and they were looking into the Panama property, and it was global. They were looking all over the globe for the way Trump does business, who supplies him with money. And they found, through their forensics and, some stuff that the accountants do at Fusion, that he's got money loans from Deutsche Bank, and Deutsche Bank is then fined for Russian money laundering, and, things are clicking in their head. But the investigation is not funded because Trump wins the Republican nomination. So the Democrats say, well, we know that you were the company that was doing the opposition research on Trump, so you know what? It was a law firm. It was Mark Elias's law firm. And it's always law firms that hire these kinds of investigators. That's what they do. So they said, you know what, we'll continue to pay for it. Keep going. So, because they had found all this money laundering through Deutsche Bank with the Russians, and Trump owned properties in former Soviet republics and had done business in crazy far-flung places like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, etc., they hired... It wasn't just one guy, okay? It wasn't just Chris Steele. They had hired guys to cover Latin America. They had hired a guy to cover Panama. They had hired a guy to cover the factories in Mexico. They hired an Asian expert to cover some of the sweatshops he was running in Asia. Okay, Chris Steele was hired to do the Russia portion of the investigation. And why? Because Chris Steele was a former MI6 guy, a senior guy who worked the Russia desk for British intelligence. So Glenn Simpson had worked with Chris Steele. They had worked together since 2009. Chris Steele was somebody he knew. He knew he could trust him. He said that, over the 10 years, almost 10 years that they had worked together, he had never, lied to him or misrepresented or emphasized something that didn't deserve emphasis, or, was always accurate and was always, thorough, and was never, a drama queen, didn't make stuff up. And that, that's why he hired Chris Steele. So Chris Steele, starts to look around, and he's generally investigating Trump, in the Russia arena. Of course, other people are investigating him in Panama, and other people are investigating his properties, in Azerbaijan or whatever. And then they start seeing mob ties between Trump and Russian mobsters. And one of those Russian mobsters was Felix Sater. The guy who we all know stabbed a guy in the neck with a margarita glass stem. Remember that? Yeah. And they're like, Felix Sater works for Donald Trump, and everybody knew that Felix Sater had mob ties because Felix Sater, was prosecuted and then supposedly flipped or whatever. But they thought it was very odd that Trump hired Felix Sater, even knowing his mob connections. And so what Glenn Simpson testifies to is that told him a lot about Donald Trump. And so Chris Steele started nosing around, and of course he had contacts in Russia. He had an ex-KGB general. He had a bunch of people, okay, that he could. And while he's investigating, he finds evidence of an ongoing, real-time, ongoing crime that Trump is committing. And he finds that the Russians have compromising evidence against Donald Trump, and that Donald Trump can be blackmailed. And so Chris Steele asks his boss at his contractor, he's a subcontractor. He asked his boss, Glenn Simpson. He tells him he wants to go to the FBI. He said, "Look, I'm concerned. I am, very, very concerned. I think I have evidence of an ongoing crime. I have evidence of conversations. I have evidence of a compromise that the Russians have on a presidential candidate. And he's the Republican nominee. And I want to go to the FBI with it." And Glenn Simpson didn't know, what he testifies to the Senate Judiciary Committee that he's a political guy, and that he's not an intelligence guy, and that Chris Steele was the intelligence expert, and so he deferred to Chris Steele. And Chris Steele did go to the FBI. He went to the FBI in July of 2016, and they didn't hear back from the FBI. Nothing happened. And then in October, all of a sudden, Glenn Simpson says something to Chris Steele, like, "Have you ever heard back from the FBI?" And he said, no, I haven't. So he goes back to, he has a contact at the FBI, Chris Steele does, and he goes back to his contact, which is redacted from the transcript, so I can't tell you who it was, but he goes back to his contact at the FBI and tells him, what do you think? I mean, I've been waiting for an answer. And they go, "Well, we didn't want to answer you because, we don't know, but I'll tell you, since you gave us this stuff, we have evidence from inside the Trump campaign. There is a person inside, human intelligence inside the Trump campaign, that has told us the same thing that you did. And so now we believe you, Chris Steele. We believe what whatever documents he gave or whatever testimony he gave or whatever." And they said, "We want to talk to you again." And so Chris Steele was told to go meet with the head of the Rome, Italy division of the FBI, probably so it would go unnoticed. And he does go to Rome, and he does meet with this person whose name is also redacted. I don't know if it's the same person or a different person, but he does meet with him. And the FBI in Rome tells Chris Steele that Chris Steele's dossier is corroborated by a human person inside the Trump campaign. Now, back to the Prevezon case for a brief moment. The Prevezon case was settled in May of 2016. The papers had to be drawn up. The documents had to be, drawn up. The settlement agreement had to be drafted. And it took a month. And then once the settlement was drafted, it was now June 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th of 2016. And Natalia Veselnitskaya flies back to New York to sign off on the settlement agreement in the Prevezon case. This is completely unrelated to Fusion, right? This is the whole other lawsuit that Fusion was asked to hunt Bill Browder just to serve him with a subpoena. Okay, so she's in New York to sign off on the settlement between Prevezon that mysteriously gets settled for just this tiny little amount once Donald Trump becomes president of the United States and fires Preet Bharara. And while she's there signing off on the settlement, that is when she goes and meets with Donald Trump Jr. at Trump Tower. In that meeting was a guy named Rinat Akhmetshin, who was also part of the Prevezon case. Renat is somebody Bill Browder described to us as, all Putined up. I mean, he's one of the biggest oligarchs there is. And these two end up in Donald Trump Jr.'s office. Like the ink isn't even dry on the settlement case, and then they go by Donald Trump Jr.'s office. You're going to have to fill in the blanks, but this is what the transcript shows happened. The FBI didn't know what to do about Chris Steele's information, and then in October, somebody came forward. Also, we know from the New York Times that George Papadopoulos got drunk with the Australian ambassador and told him that Trump was all mobbed up. So my guess is Papadopoulos was the human contact inside the Trump campaign, and that the ambassador from Australia had called President Obama.
Go to RandyRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.